All right, so this is going to be the video for exercise 4. I actually do have a video already up from somebody else, right? It's kind of just a video from YouTube that I'd have for the students for this. But since I'm doing all these video recordings, I'm like going to do an exercise 4 video for you guys. Now, this is really about camera animation, right? Camera animation is one of those things you probably don't need to have an intro 3D modeling class, but they'd like me to teach it. So we're just going to do a simple kind of camera fly-through in this scene, right? Now in this case, and we're going to do like a quick play blast render. So in this case, we don't need to have the texturing visible, so I'll just hit 5, right? Because remember, 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is texture. We'll just do 5. And what I want to do is I want to actually create a curve, right? And we've done curves before. So I'll tap spacebar to kind of go out to my 4 views. Remember, you can actually, I was hitting A to fit all for those scenes. Remember, if you hit 4 with your cursor over each viewport, remember, you can have wireframe and shaded independent of each other, right? These views can all be wireframe, and this one can be shaded, right? 5 shaded, 4 wireframe. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a curve kind of from the top view. So I'm going to go to Create, Curve Tool, CV Curve Tool. I'm just going to kind of draw a little bit of a path here. So I'll just left click, left click, left click, left click. Doesn't have to be too crazy, right? Just kind of a little bit of a path here. Enter. Remember, this is like all exercises. It's not really so much about being this awesome quality as you did it, right? You've completed it, so you're familiar with the concept. So that gives us a curve. Now it's probably flat on the bottom, so I'll just hit W for move to move it up a bit, so it'll kind of be more kind of middle of the room, right? So that gives us a curve, right? And this is going to be, we're actually going to have a camera fly along this curve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Create, and I'm going to go to Cameras, Camera, right? So we can create our own independent camera for this. And there we go. You might hit R for scale just to scale it up a little bit so you can see it, right? Sometimes they're made small. So once you create it, just hit R for scale to scale it up a little bit, and there's our camera, right? Now, one of the things you can actually do, right, is I've got the camera selected, and then I'm going to hold down Shift to select the curve itself. And what we're going to do is we're going to switch from the modeling menu right here to animation, right? Because this is going to give us the ability to do things like constrain, right? The constrain menu here. So remember, when you switch from modeling, right, there's mesh, edit mesh, mesh tools. If you click on here and switch to animation, it gives you different ones like key, playback. That's actually where our play blast is going to be. We're going to do a quick down and dirty movie render for this. And that's what you'll actually submit. But we want to constrain this camera. So we select the camera first, right? So I just selected the camera. And then I shift click on the curve, right? Shift adds to selections. We'll go to constrain. And we're going to go to motion paths, right? And you'll see we can actually attach to a motion path. So I'm going to go to the options box for this, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to do a start end, right? Starts 1 frame, ends at frame 30. We probably want something a little bit longer than that, so what we can do is maybe do 90, right? Technically, we're set to 24 frames a second, so it'll probably do a little more than 3 seconds, but it's easy to remember. We at least get a couple of seconds out of that. So that'll give us 90, right? 1 frame through 90 frames. By default, this is set to 24 frames a second, so this will be a couple second long video. And of course, we want to set it to follow. I'm trying to remember which ones we want the axes to follow here. Let's see. What I can always do is I can always reset it as we go. But in this case, I think we want to inverse up. I usually turn bank on. And I feel like it's usually inverse front also. But we'll kind of check. We can always kind of undo if it's not attached the way we want to. So we'll hit attach. And in this case, you can actually see it is upside down, right? And you'll notice we now have down here, see how there's this blue? That's indicating the frames. So you see in this case, the camera is actually not exactly lined up the way I want it to be. So I'm just going to undo a couple steps. Control Z to undo, right? We'll go to constrain motion paths, attach to motion path. And let's see, a lot of it's already set up. In this case, if I remember correctly, front axis should be Z. And we'll kind of leave the inverse up off. And then we'll hit attach. Now in this case, you can kind of see that the camera's pointing in this direction, right? But it's now following the path properly. So once again, I'll do one more time. Sometimes you just kind of have to experiment with it a little bit. So we'll go back to constrain motion path, attach to motion path. In this case, we'll inverse front, right? So we pick the Z front axis because then it kind of lines up the Z axis of the camera with the curve. But you'll see that sometimes it's flipped, right? It's facing the other direction. So inverse front should work pretty well. Attach. And now you'll see the camera is actually properly attached and pointing. And you'll notice if we go down here and we drag the slider, you see how we're dragging through the frames. These are frames, right? So you see how it's going to kind of get past 90 and you see how the camera stops? But you'll see how this camera follows the curve now, right? So that's a huge part of this. We're then going to go to panels, the panels menu, right? Remember, you can switch your orthographic views from here, right? You can actually put in the hypergraph in here. We'll talk a little about the hypergraph later on. Panel editor, right? Panels, you can put UV editors in here. But in this case, we just want to go to perspective, camera 1. And now you'll see that we're actually looking at the camera. So if we slide this through, you notice how the camera is actually going through and playing this, right? So there we go. That's working pretty well for us. That should be good. I'm trying to remember, I think it's animation preferences there. If this is going a little too fast, right, one of the things you can do is kind of click on this button down here. It kind of looks like the orange running out with the cog. And I believe in here somewhere is playback speed, right? So you might just want to kind of change that to not be as fast, right? So sometimes you kind of have to change that to, it looks like the default's better set now. But just keep that in mind if for whatever reason this is going really fast for you. You might just need to kind of change the playback speed to something lower. But it looked like it was working pretty well for us. So now all we have to do is do a play blast render of this, right? So what we can do is we can go to playback right here, and we can go to play blast options box, right? And we'll pick start end, and we'll tell it to do 90 just like we had before, right? There we go. So that'll kind of go from the first frame 1 to the 90. And then what we're going to do is we can just leave AVI fine, right? What we do is we want to go to save to file, right? And this will allow us to save it in an area, right? So we can go to browse, and we can save it right in movies. We can call this exercise 4. So you see how this is going to go right to this project, right? Of course, you can save it to desktop if you want to. But we'll just do exercise 4, hit save. But you have to do save to file, right? So that it actually saves the video. And then we'll hit play blast, and you see how it kind of goes through and here makes a video. And there's your play blast video. Now you can see here it doesn't have to be the best quality. It's just a way to show me that, hey, you know how to create a camera, you can attach a camera to path, you know what keyframes are, right? You can actually set your own keys when you're doing more complicated animation right here, right? Key menu, set key. But here it's just a simple kind of camera fly-through. Because as a modeler, you're not really going to do any heavy animation, but you might need to do fly-throughs of your models to show your models off, right? Or have a turntable, right? A lot of people don't even do that anymore, right? They can just take all the kinds of renders at different angles. It depends on what studio you're going to look at, if they want turnaround animations or just still frames. I've found in the modern context that there's no real right or wrong with that anymore. It's just look at the studio and what they want. Do they want turntables or still images? Fine. If you're going to do still images, though, you want it from a couple of different views to show off all the models pretty well. You'd also do things like wireframe renders, which we're just not covering in this class. You should see that in later classes. But that's it. That's how you can create a play blast, a quick, rough render or movie animation, and how you can actually do a little bit of basic animation. But that's what keyframes are, right? They're just your ability to actually set the frame for animation. And then mine just fills in the rest of the keys, right? All right, be a great place.